The Zarnath scout ship descended through the thick clouds of Earth's atmosphere, its sleek, insect-like frame cutting through the mist with precision. Inside, Commander Xylac clicked his mandibles in irritation, watching the planet's dense greenery unfold on the viewscreen. "This is a waste of our time," he muttered, his voice a low hiss that carried disdain. Lieutenant Sarek, a younger warrior with a nervous twitch, glanced over at the commander. "The Queen has commanded we gather samples from every planet in this sector," he reminded softly, though his voice lacked confidence. "Even primitive ones like this." Xylac's mandibles tightened. "We should be conquering star systems, not collecting soil and insect samples," he snapped. His irritation was palpable, his mood souring further as the ship shuddered slightly from the atmospheric pressure. "Prepare the bioweapons. Let's make this quick." The Zarnath ship landed with a thud in the middle of a dense forest. Tall trees surrounded the landing site, their leaves rustling in the breeze, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The sound of chirping birds and buzzing insects filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the alien craft. Xylac stepped onto the forest floor, his feet crunching on the underbrush. He glanced around with a sneer. "Disgusting," he muttered, activating his visor to scan for lifeforms. The display lit up with countless signals, small insects, birds, and mammals, all scurrying or flying about, oblivious to the invaders from another world. As the other warriors deployed from the ship, they began setting up advanced bioweapon devices to collect samples. The air hummed with the faint energy of their equipment, the faint blue light casting an eerie glow on the forest floor. Sarek moved cautiously, his antennae twitching nervously. "Commander, are we sure this planet poses no threat?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Xylac laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "These creatures are insignificant. Observe," he said, pointing to a nearby tree where a colony of ants was busily marching in a line. With a casual flick of his wrist, he activated a small device that emitted a burst of energy, instantly vaporizing the insects. "See? Nothing but pests." A few meters away, the warriors worked to secure their equipment, their movements swift and efficient. One warrior, less cautious than the others, swung his arm too wide and struck a large wasp nest hanging from a low branch. The nest trembled, and for a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, all at once, the wasps erupted from the nest, a furious swarm of black and yellow. They surged toward the alien invaders with a collective, aggressive buzz that filled the air. Xylac turned just in time to see the dark cloud of insects heading straight for them. "Defensive positions!" he barked, but his command came too late. The wasps attacked with a ferocity that caught the Zarnath completely off guard. Their stings pierced through the thin fabric of the alien suits, injecting venom that burned like fire. Warriors swatted uselessly at the swarm, their sophisticated weapons rendered ineffective against such small, fast-moving targets. Panic spread through the ranks as more wasps emerged from hidden nests, joining the fray with relentless aggression. Xylac's confidence wavered for the first time. "Retreat to the ship!" he ordered, his voice tinged with a fear he hadn't felt in years. The warriors stumbled back, tripping over roots and crashing through underbrush, their retreat turning chaotic. The wasps pursued them mercilessly, their stings driving the aliens further into disarray. From a distance, a lone figure observed the commotion. The Beekeeper, an older man with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, watched as the strange, armored figures flailed against the onslaught of wasps. He stood on the edge of the forest, his bee suit loose around his thin frame, eyes narrowed with curiosity. He had lived here for decades, tended to his bees, and understood the delicate balance of nature. Whatever these creatures were, they had upset that balance. He moved closer, careful not to draw attention to himself. His practiced eye caught the signs of the disturbed ecosystem, birds fleeing their nests, deer bolting through the underbrush. He noticed the wasps' intensity, their coordinated attack on the intruders, and knew something unusual was happening. Xylac and his remaining warriors finally reached the ship, slamming the hatch shut behind them. Inside, the sound of the wasps' relentless buzzing was muffled but still audible, a haunting reminder of their unexpected defeat. "What in the Queen's name were those things?" Sarek gasped, clutching his arm where a wasp sting had pierced through his suit. Xylac, breathing heavily, glared at the screen showing the swarming wasps outside. I don't know, he admitted, his arrogance replaced by a cold realization. But we underestimated this planet. Prepare for immediate takeoff. We need to regroup and figure out what we're dealing with. As the ship's engines roared to life, the Beekeeper watched from his hidden vantage point. He had seen enough to understand that these invaders were not invincible. They were just another creature in the vast web of life, one that had foolishly underestimated the resilience of Earth's defenders. He turned back towards his home, a plan forming in his mind. In the quiet aftermath of the skirmish, the forest slowly returned to its natural rhythm, but the Beekeeper knew it would never be quite the same. Inside the Czarnus ship, the air was tense. The faint hum of the engines, usually a comforting sound, now felt oppressive under the weight of their recent failure. Commander Xylac paced back and forth across the dimly lit command center, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. The buzzing of the wasps outside had finally ceased, but the memory of the attack lingered like a venomous sting. We underestimated them, Xylac admitted, breaking the silence. His voice, usually steady and commanding, wavered slightly. These earth insects, they are not like anything we've encountered before. Lieutenant Sarek, still nursing his wounded arm, approached the commander cautiously. Commander, their venom, it did something to us. I felt disconnected. Like my thoughts were scattering. Xylac turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. The hive mind, he muttered, more to himself than to Sarek. Their venom interfered with our communication. It's not just their numbers that are a threat, it's their ability to disrupt us on a fundamental level. Sarek nodded, swallowing hard. What do we do now, Commander? We can't just leave without completing our mission. The Queen. I know what the Queen commanded. Xylac snapped, his frustration boiling over. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. We need to adapt. They may be small, but they are far from insignificant. Prepare the neuroshield emitters. We will counter their venom and finish what we came here to do. As Sarek and the other warriors hurried to adjust their equipment, Xylac moved to the central console and began scanning the area outside the ship. The forest, now bathed in the soft light of early evening, seemed deceptively calm. The wasps had retreated to their nests, their threat momentarily subdued, but Xylac knew better than to assume they were safe. He could see the Beekeeper's figure, partially hidden behind a thick oak, observing the ship with an intense gaze. What is that human doing? Xylac wondered aloud. He zoomed in on the figure, noting the Beekeeper's steady, deliberate movements as he navigated the forest floor. This one was different, Xylac thought. Not fleeing in panic like the others. Watching, waiting, almost like he was studying them. We have a problem, Xylac announced, his voice steady but urgent. There's a human out there. Alone. He hasn't run. He's observing us. Prepare for a potential encounter. We must not underestimate them again. Meanwhile, the Beekeeper moved closer, each step calculated and quiet. He could sense the unease within the alien craft. He had seen their frantic retreat, their desperation to regroup. There was a vulnerability there, something he could exploit. He crouched low, feeling the damp earth beneath his hands, and scanned the clearing for any signs of movement. His bee suit, loose and comfortable, rustled softly with each step. He adjusted his hood, ensuring his face was fully covered. The forest around him was alive with the sounds of evening, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, the occasional hoot of an owl. But his focus remained on the ship and its strange occupants. Inside the ship, Sarek and the warriors activated the neuroshield emitters, a soft blue light emanating from their suits. Neuroshields online, Sarek reported, his voice more confident now. We should be protected from any further venom attacks, Commander. Xylac nodded, satisfied. Good. We move out again, but this time, stay alert. We are not leaving until we have completed our mission. He turned to the main hatch, which slowly began to open with a low hiss. As the Zarnath stepped out of the ship, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees, tall and imposing, cast long shadows across the ground, and the underbrush rustled with unseen creatures. The warriors fanned out, their movements cautious and deliberate. Xylak led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the human or the wasps. The beekeeper watched from his hiding spot, his breath steady and controlled. He knew he needed to act fast. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small metal canister filled with smoke, a tool he often used to calm his bees. He ignited it, releasing a thick cloud that quickly spread through the clearing. The Zarnath hesitated, their eyes darting around as the smoke filled the air. "What is this?" one of the warriors muttered, waving a hand in front of his face. Xylak's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "It's a distraction," he shouted. "Stay focused. Eyes on the human." But it was too late. The beekeeper moved swiftly, using the smoke as cover. He approached the nearest warrior, grabbing at his equipment and pulling it free with a quick, practiced motion. The warrior stumbled back, disoriented by the sudden attack and the thick smoke that obscured his vision. "Commander!" Sarek shouted, raising his weapon. "The human is attacking!" Xylak turned, but the smoke made it hard to see. He could barely make out the silhouette of the beekeeper moving through the haze, quick and silent like a ghost. "Fall back!" Xylak ordered, frustration and anger seeping into his voice. "Regroup at the ship. We need to." His command was cut short as the beekeeper threw another canister, this one filled with a potent mix of herbs that produced a nauseating scent. The Zarnath recoiled, their senses overwhelmed. The forest around them seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, the sounds growing louder and more chaotic. Xylak stumbled back, his vision blurring, his head spinning. He could hear Sarek shouting orders, but the words were lost in the cacophony of noise. The commander's confidence, so firm just moments ago, was now shattered, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. The beekeeper, unseen but very much present, circled the clearing, watching as the Zarnath retreated once more to the safety of their ship. He could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty that gripped the alien invaders. They had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they were learning the hard way that this planet had its own defenders, small, unassuming, but fiercely protective. As the ship's hatch closed behind the last of the Zarnath warriors, the beekeeper smiled to himself. He had no intention of letting them leave without a lesson. He would show them that Earth was not to be trifled with, no matter how insignificant they thought its inhabitants might be. And so, the forest settled back into a tense silence, the ship's engines humming softly as the Zarnath prepared for their next move. But now, they knew better than to underestimate the will of Earth's guardians. The Zarnath ship's interior was a dimly lit sanctuary of tension and unease. Commander Xylak stood rigid at the helm, his eyes fixed on the screens displaying the dense forest outside. The smoke had cleared, but its acrid scent still clung to the walls, a reminder of their recent humiliation. He could feel his crew's eyes on him, their confidence shaken, their trust in his leadership fraying at the edges. "We can't stay trapped here," Xylak growled, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the metallic confines of the ship. "That human is more than just a nuisance. He's a strategist, a threat." Lieutenant Sarek, positioned near the rear console, was frantically adjusting the settings on their neuroshields. "Commander, our neuroshields will hold, but they won't protect us forever. The human's tactics are unpredictable. We need a plan to counteract his methods." Xylak nodded, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Agreed. We underestimated him once. We won't make that mistake again. Prepare the reconnaissance drones. We need to understand his movements and plan our next steps accordingly." The warriors moved swiftly, their hands a blur of motion as they activated the drones. The small, spherical machines hummed to life, their tiny propellers slicing through the air with a soft, whirring sound. They hovered momentarily before darting out into the forest, their sensors scanning every detail of the terrain. Outside, the forest was shrouded in the deep blues of twilight. The once warm light had shifted to a cooler hue, casting elongated shadows that danced among the trees. The buzzing of insects had resumed, but there was a palpable tension in the air, a stillness that suggested the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The beekeeper crouched behind a large, gnarled tree, his eyes sharp as he watched the drones scatter into the forest. He had anticipated a response, knowing the aliens wouldn't remain passive for long. With practiced precision, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handheld jammer, a small device he had crafted for disrupting local frequencies. With a flick of his thumb, the jammer emitted a low, pulsating hum. The drones faltered, their propellers sputtering as they lost connection with the mothership. The beekeeper moved quickly, darting between trees, using the thick foliage as cover. He approached the nearest drone, a sleek silver orb now lying dormant on the forest floor. With a swift motion, he retrieved a small net from his belt and ensnared the device, pulling it into his grasp. Inside the ship, Xylac's eyes widened as the drone feeds cut out one by one, the screens blinking into static. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice edged with panic. Sarek's fingers flew over the console, trying to re-establish control. "The drones, they've been jammed, Commander. The human must have some kind of disruption technology." "Impossible," Xylac hissed, though he knew deep down that nothing seemed impossible with this human. "He's playing with us." "But why?" As the drones lay motionless and defeated, the beekeeper studied the one in his grasp. Its sleek metal surface was cool against his skin, its design alien yet oddly familiar, as if nature itself had influenced its curves and shapes. He placed the jammer next to it, flipping a switch to boost its signal. He had to ensure the drones stayed offline. Back in the ship, Sarek let out a frustrated growl. "Commander, we can't keep this up. We're losing valuable time, and our resources are depleting. We need to confront him directly." Xylac turned sharply, his frustration boiling over into anger. "You think I don't know that? We can't just rush in blindly. He knows this terrain, and he's using it against us. We need to outthink him." Sarek clenched his jaw, his eyes darting to the screens that were now blank except for the flickering static. "Then what's the plan?" Xylac's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "We bait him out. He's bold, but he's also cautious. He won't risk a direct confrontation unless he's forced to. We use his own tactics against him, lure him into a trap." Outside, the beekeeper continued his work, his focus unwavering. He could feel the tension in the air, a charge that seemed to ripple through the trees like a current. He knew the aliens wouldn't give up easily. They were too prideful, too convinced of their own superiority. But he also knew the forest better than anyone. It was his home, his sanctuary, and he would defend it with every ounce of his strength. He moved swiftly through the underbrush, his steps silent, his movements fluid. He approached a clearing where the ground was soft and damp, the perfect place for his next move. From his pack, he pulled out a small vial of honey and a handful of herbs. He mixed them together, creating a pungent paste that he spread across the bark of a nearby tree. The scent would draw in more wasps, heightening their aggression and directing them towards the area he had chosen. He knew the aliens would sense the gathering swarm and move in to investigate. They wouldn't be able to resist the lure of a potential victory. Inside the ship, Xylac was formulating his own plan. "We use the remaining drones to simulate a retreat," he explained, his voice calm and calculated. "Make it look like we're falling back to a safer position. When the human moves in to capitalize on our perceived weakness, we strike." Sarek nodded, understanding. "We'll need to be quick. The drones won't last long under his interference." Xylac's eyes glinted with a fierce determination. "Then let's make every second count. Prepare the warriors. This ends now." The drones, reactivated with a new directive, began to retreat back towards the ship, their lights flickering as they moved through the darkening forest. The beekeeper watched them carefully, noting the shift in their behavior. He sensed a trap but couldn't discern its nature. He would need to proceed with caution, leveraging every advantage the forest could offer. As night fully descended, the forest became a battleground of shadows and whispers. The Zarnath, cloaked in darkness, prepared to face the enigmatic human once more, each side poised for the final confrontation. With a deep breath, the Beekeeper made his decision. He wouldn't let the invaders claim his land. He would fight, not just for himself, but for every living thing that called this place home. As he stepped into the clearing, the night air heavy with anticipation, he knew that the true battle was just beginning. The forest was a maze of shadows and silence, the thick canopy above hiding the moonlight and creating a cloak of darkness. The air was cool and dense, heavy with the scent of earth and leaves, and the soft rustle of nocturnal creatures waking filled the void left by the silence. The Zarnath warriors, camouflaged by their sleek, dark armor, moved cautiously through the underbrush, each step careful to avoid snapping a twig or disturbing a leaf. The tension was palpable, a taut wire stretched to its limit. Commander Zilak led the way, his eyes sharp and focused, scanning the dark for any sign of movement. The human had outmaneuvered them at every turn, but now they were prepared. They would turn the hunter into the hunted. The plan was simple: lure the Beekeeper into a trap and end this conflict once and for all. "Remember," Zilak whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Stay alert. The human is cunning, but he underestimates our resolve. This is our territory now." Lieutenant Sarek nodded, his grip tight on his plasma rifle. "He won't slip through our fingers this time, Commander. We'll catch him and show him what it means to challenge the Zarnath." They advanced further into the forest, the dim glow of the drones ahead acting as a beacon. Zilak had set them to move in a pattern, mimicking a retreat. It was a ploy, a calculated risk meant to draw the Beekeeper out of hiding. They needed him to believe they were vulnerable, on the run. And when he moved in for the strike, they would be ready. From a nearby vantage point, the Beekeeper watched, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the alien movements. He could see the glow of their drones, the purposeful yet cautious steps of the warriors as they navigated the terrain. He knew they were setting a trap. He could feel it in the air, a slight shift, a subtle change in the rhythm of the forest. But he was not afraid. He had lived in these woods his entire life, knew every tree, every rock, every hidden path. This was his domain, and he would not let these invaders take it from him. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small device he had fashioned from salvaged electronics, a signal booster. It wasn't much, but it would amplify the jamming frequency, making the drone's retreat even more convincing. With a flick of a switch, the booster hummed to life, sending out a pulse that scrambled the drone's signals further. The orbs wavered in their flight, their movements erratic, as if panicked. The Zarnath halted, watching the spectacle, uncertainty flickering across their expressions. Zilak's eyes narrowed. "He's here," he hissed. "Hold your positions. He's close, I can feel it." The Beekeeper circled around, keeping low to the ground, moving with the stealth and grace of a predator. He knew the aliens were expecting him to attack directly, but he had no intention of playing into their hands. He needed to be smarter, to think several steps ahead. He reached another vantage point, crouching behind a fallen log, and surveyed the clearing where the Zarnath had gathered. The warriors stood ready, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. Zilak stood at the center, his posture rigid, every muscle tensed. They were waiting for him, expecting him to come charging in like some reckless beast. He would give them what they wanted, but not in the way they expected. He reached into his satchel again and pulled out a handful of small stones, each one coated with a thick, sticky substance, a mixture of honey and potent herbs designed to attract and agitate the wasps. With a precise flick of his wrist, he tossed the stones into the clearing, the sound of them hitting the ground barely audible over the ambient noise of the forest. The effect was immediate. The scent carried through the air, and within moments, the first wasps appeared, drawn by the smell. They buzzed angrily, their wings beating like tiny war drums. More followed, until a thick, dark cloud of them hovered above the clearing, their agitation growing with each passing second. Zilak's eyes widened in alarm. "What is he doing?" he muttered, watching the swarm gather. "Why isn't he attacking?" Sarek's voice was tight with fear. "Commander, we need to move." The wasps. "Hold your ground!" Zilak barked. This is a diversion. Stay focused. But the wasps, sensing the foreign presence in their territory, began to dive, their stingers glinting in the dim light. The Zarnath warriors swung their weapons, firing blindly into the swarm, their shots wild and panicked. The wasps responded with fury, their small bodies moving with the speed and precision of a well-trained army. The beekeeper watched from his hidden spot, his eyes calm and focused. He had no intention of attacking head-on. His goal was to sow chaos, to turn the Zarnath's own tactics against them. He knew their armor could withstand the wasp stings, but their hive-mind communication was vulnerable to disruption. And as the wasps closed in, their numbers growing by the second, he could see the cracks beginning to form. Xylax swung his rifle, trying to swat the insects away, but it was useless. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the buzzing swarm. "Regroup at the ship!" But it was too late. The swarm had them surrounded, the wasps darting in and out, stinging wherever they could find exposed flesh. The warriors, blinded by panic, began to retreat, their formation collapsing into disarray. The beekeeper moved in, taking advantage of the confusion. He darted through the trees, closing the distance to the ship. He needed to disable their systems, to ensure they couldn't regroup and launch another attack. He reached the ship just as the last warrior stumbled inside, slamming the hatch shut behind them. Inside, the Zarnath were in chaos. The hive mind was failing, the warriors' thoughts fragmented and disconnected. Xylax slammed his fist against the control panel, trying to regain control. "We need to get out of here," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "We can't fight him like this." Outside, the beekeeper planted a small device on the ship's hull, a jammer he had designed to disrupt their communications further. He activated it, sending a pulse through the ship that caused the lights to flicker and dim. Inside, the ship's systems began to fail, the lights blinking in and out, the controls unresponsive. Xylax stared at the screens, his mind racing. He had never faced an enemy like this, one who fought not with brute strength but with strategy and cunning. He knew they were beaten. "We have to leave," Sarek said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're no match for him." Xylax nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Prepare for emergency liftoff," he ordered. "We retreat for now, but this isn't over. We will return." As the ship's engines roared to life, the beekeeper stepped back, watching with a quiet satisfaction. He had won, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Zarnath would return, and when they did, he would be ready. The ship lifted off, disappearing into the night sky, leaving behind the silent forest, the buzzing of the wasps, and one determined human who had proven that even the smallest creatures could defend their home.